The Sackler family fits the category of professionals turned investors, practitioners who leveraged expertise and institutional access to build a business that would generate billions, fund prominent cultural institutions, and ultimately become synonymous with the American opioid crisis. The story begins in Brooklyn in the 1910s and 1920s, with three brothers born to Isaac and Sophie Sackler, Jewish immigrants from Galicia. The family wasn't wealthy, but education was a priority. All three sons, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond, earned medical degrees. Arthur was the eldest and the most entrepreneurially restless. He worked simultaneously as a psychiatrist and a medical advertising copywriter, giving him an unusual advantage. He understood both the science of drugs and the psychology of selling them. In the 1950s, Arthur joined the William Douglas McAdams Agency and crafted pharmaceutical campaigns at a time when marketing directly to physicians was still largely unregulated. His work for Librium and Valium, tranquilizers made by Roche, was highly effective. Valium became the best-selling drug in America through much of the 1960s and 1970s. The core insight Arthur demonstrated would define the family's business for decades. Knowing how to sell a drug was as valuable as knowing how to make one. In 1952, the three brothers purchased Purdue Pharma, a small company producing laxatives and earwax treatments. They saw it as a platform. When Arthur died in 1987, his stake was separated from his brothers. Mortimer and Raymond retained control and built the company's ownership through a web of trusts and private entities. No outside shareholders, no public filings, no quarterly disclosures. Privacy was a deliberate operational choice, not an afterthought. By the late 1980s, Purdue had developed MS-Contin, a controlled-release morphine tablet for cancer patients, and saw broader commercial potential in that delivery technology. In 1995, the company launched OxyContin, a controlled-release formulation of oxycodone. The FDA approved it with labeling that suggested a lower abuse potential than immediate-release opioids, a claim that was scientifically disputed and would later be formally challenged. Purdue's sales strategy was aggressive and methodical. Hundreds of representatives were trained to target primary care physicians, general practitioners treating back pain and arthritis, not just pain specialists. Reps earned bonuses tied directly to prescription volumes. High-prescribing doctors received more frequent visits, free samples, and invitations to company-sponsored conferences at luxury resorts, framed as medical education. Sales training told reps that OxyContin's addiction risk was less than 1%. A figure taken from a brief letter in the New England Journal of Medicine that had been dramatically misrepresented. When physicians raised concerns about patient dependency, reps were coached to reframe it as undertreated pain. OxyContin crossed $1 billion in annual revenue within a few years of launch and reached roughly $3 billion a year by the mid-2000s. Court filings would later indicate the family took more than $10 billion out of Purdue over the company's lifetime through distributions and consultancy arrangements. While revenue climbed, communities across America were seeing sharp increases in opioid dependency and overdose deaths. Patients on legitimate prescriptions were crushing and injecting tablets. Others moved to heroin when pills became unavailable or too expensive. The CDC's data was unambiguous. Prescription opioids were driving a national overdose surge. Purdue's public position was that addiction resulted from misuse, not from the drug or the marketing. The company pursued legal action against journalists and researchers who challenged that framing. In 2007, Purdue and three executives pleaded guilty to federal misbranding charges. The company paid around $600 million in fines. The executives paid individual penalties. None went to prison. Sackler family board members were not charged, with the family maintaining they had relied on management and were unaware of the specific misconduct. The key family figure in this period was Richard Sackler, son of Raymond, who served on the board and as company president in the early 2000s. Internal emails surfaced through litigation showed Richard directly engaged in sales strategy, and in some messages, referring to addicted patients in terms critics described as dismissive. Those communications became central evidence in subsequent cases. The family was not a passive ownership group. Internal documents indicated they were informed about the commercial strategy and the emerging concerns around it. Meanwhile, the family cultivated a parallel identity as philanthropists. They donated heavily to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian, the Louvre, Harvard, and Oxford, among many others. The second generation was raised with strong emphasis on educational achievement, and family members were absorbed into either the business or professional careers nearby. Philanthropy served a practical function alongside a genuine one. It built social legitimacy for a family whose primary business was increasingly under scrutiny. The CDC estimates that between 1999 and 2021, more than 500,000 people died from opioid overdoses in the United States. The prescription-driven wave of the first 15 years seeded a broader crisis as dependent patients shifted to heroin and then to illicitly manufactured fentanyl, a progression that continues to cause mass casualties today. By the late 2010s, thousands of lawsuits had been filed against Purdue and against Sackler family members personally, with plaintiffs arguing the billions extracted before bankruptcy were intended to shield assets from creditors. Purdue filed for Chapter 11 in 2019. A settlement was reached involving a liability release for the family in exchange for over $6 billion in payments. But the Supreme Court struck down that release in 2024, ruling it legally impermissible for non-consenting parties. The matter returned to lower courts. In January 2025, a new $7.4 billion settlement was reached with a bipartisan coalition of state attorneys general. As part of that agreement, the family gave up control of Purdue entirely and agreed to be barred from selling opioids in the United States. Over 99% of creditors approved the deal. Payments to individual victims and states began in 2026. Purdue's remaining assets were reorganized into a public benefit company called Purdue Pharma, focused on opioid treatment and overdose reversal. Running alongside the American business the entire time was Purdue Pharma, the international pharmaceutical network the family built through private holding structures. Purdue Pharma operates in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, selling OxyContin and related products in foreign markets. Journalists and researchers found its overseas marketing closely mirrored the domestic approach that had been litigated for years, targeting physicians in countries with less stringent oversight. Purdue Pharma still earns more than $1 billion a year, primarily in China and other international markets, and remains under family control. As for where the family stands today, they are largely out of public view. Richard Sackler, now 81, lives outside Austin, Texas, and operates a private charitable foundation. He has given no significant public interviews and has not admitted wrongdoing. When David and Keith Sackler were called before Congress in 2020, the hearing was conducted over Zoom, and no Sackler appeared at all during the November 2025 bankruptcy proceedings. The family has consistently let lawyers handle public-facing communication and avoided any direct reckoning beyond what courts compelled. Their name has been removed from the Met, the Louvre, the Tate Modern, and institutions across the world. Photographer Nan Goldin, herself a survivor of OxyContin addiction, led the activist organization PAIN in pressuring museums and universities to refuse or return Sackler donations, one of the more effective public accountability campaigns of recent years. Patrick Radden Keefe's book Empire of Pain, HBO's Crime of the Century, the Hulu series Dopesick, Netflix's Painkiller, and the Oscar-nominated documentary All the Beauty and the Bloodshed collectively cemented the public record. Despite all of it, the family retains substantial wealth, estimated at around $13 billion. The distributions taken from Purdue during its peak years were moved into trusts, real estate, art, and international entities that domestic litigation has had difficulty reaching. That insulation was structural, not accidental. The opacity the founders built into the company from the beginning, the private entities, the layered trusts, the lack of any public accountability mechanism, proved durable even as the business itself collapsed. What the Sackler story shows is a system failure as much as a family failure. Regulatory oversight was inadequate. Physician marketing was insufficiently policed. The financial incentives in the medical system rewarded high prescription volumes. And a company with enormous commercial interest actively suppressed evidence of harm. The founders' medical credentials gave them access. Arthur's advertising model gave them the tools. The private structure gave them control. The philanthropy gave them cover. Each piece was deliberately put in place. The patients whose pain became dependency, whose dependency became addiction, and whose addiction became, in hundreds of thousands of cases, death, are the human cost of that system. Whether the family's role in that outcome was willful or willfully blind remains legally unresolved. What is settled is the result: One of the most profitable pharmaceutical enterprises in American history, billions extracted from it, and a public health disaster left behind. The American dynasty is over. The international business continues. The accounting, legal and otherwise, is still not complete.